For today, we're going to look at how to find inverses of a function. So how to write them. There is a traditional method, and it goes like this. You have an inverse, 3x plus 6. Or sorry, you have a function, 3x plus 6, and you want to find the inverse. What you want to do is flip the x and the y.
Okay.
So leads to this step right here. So notice how I have f of x equals 3x plus 6. It is now x equals 3y plus 6. And then you want to solve for y. So let me subtract 6 on both sides and then divide by 3. That's going to give me my inverse of x minus 6 over 3. So here's my inverse. So again, flip your x and y and then solve for the new y. And then you're good. So it looks kind of like this algebraically. Think Marvel. Think an alternative parallel universe where everything is opposite. So I have an x value, and what's happening to the x with my function? Well, I am multiplying by 4, and then I'm subtracting 2, and that's how I get 4x minus 2. In the mirror dimension, everything is opposite with your inverse. So what happens to my x? Well, instead of subtracting 2, I add 2, and then instead of multiplying by 4, I divide by 4, and that's where I get my inverse, x plus 2 divided by 4.
Mathematics.
Now, I have created a method that makes solving for inverses go like that.
Like them?
But first, you need to memorize what is an inverse of the function. Quadratics, I showed you all this yesterday, is a square root. Cubic is cube root. Exponentials is log. Very important to remember that a rational function, 1 over x, is a rational function. Linear, x, is just another linear. So, put a star on these two
I didn't say.
right here so that you know these are inverses of themselves. Rational is a rational, linear is a linear.
What?
My technique is kind of called inside-outside. So make sure you pay attention. I have a function x plus 2 squared minus 3, and I want to find the inverse. Well, first look at the function. What's the opposite of square?
Square root.
Square root. Now look at the numbers. Plus 2, and notice how it's inside of my square. What's the opposite of being inside something?
Outside.
Outside of something. What's the opposite of plus?
Minus.
Minus.
I want to say negative.
Now look at the 3. It is outside my square here. What's the opposite of outside of something?
Inside.
What's the opposite of minus?
Plus.
There's your inverse.
Holy.
So this is an inside-outside technique I kind of developed that makes this a lot easier. And it saves you from having to write out a lot of things algebraically. Because if you were to do this the normal way, you need to flip the x and the y, so x equals y plus 2 squared minus 3, and solve for y. So let me add 3, x plus 3 equals y plus 2 squared. How do I get rid of a square?
Square root.
Square root. So I get the square root of x plus 3 equals y plus 2. And now, last but not least, subtract 2. Square root of x plus 3 minus 2 equals y. There's my inverse. But I saved myself a lot of time and work by just identifying where something starts and where it's going to end up in the alternate dimension, that mirror universe.
Yes.
So let's look at a couple of examples here and use my inside-outside technique.
Yes, sir.
F of x squared plus 5. What's the opposite of square?
Square root.
Square root. Now, this plus 5 is outside of my square. If it was inside, it would be in parentheses. So what's the opposite of outside?
Inside, so it'll be but.
Inside, what's the opposite of plus?
Minus.
There's your inverse. Square root of x minus 5.
Alright, cube root, next one, cube root.
Okay, next one. What's the opposite of cube root? Oh, sorry, what's the opposite of cubic?
Cube root.
Cube root. So I'll write the cube root of x.
Swerving.
Negative 3 inside. What happens to a negative 3 inside?
Positive
Positive
outside.
3
Very
outside.
good. Positive outside.
Yeah.
Negative 2 negative 2 outside.
Positive inside.
Positive inside. There's your
You sound like
inverse.
Jameer for a second.
There's your inverse. Now, number 3.
My marker.
What is the inverse of a linear function?
It's
Linear.
It's linear. Now, there isn't really anything inside outside with linears because it's all really relatively outside. So what's the opposite of plus 4?
Minus 4.
Minus 4, and there's your inverse. And then last but not least, what would be my inverse for number 4? Can somebody tell me? Without having to do any work by just looking at it.
Square root of negative 2.
X minus
I didn't get the.
Where did I put the minus 2?
Right there.
right there.
Outside.
Oh, there you go, outside. Yes.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
You stupid!
Inside outside.
Because they argue, so I don't do it.
Square root, and it's outside. There's your inverse.
You're talking about the wrong person.
So notice my method's really powerful and really, really fast when we're dealing with a plus and minuses here. Now it gets a little tricky, but the philosophy is still the same when we are multiplying or dividing. So let's look
Everything goes to.
at these examples. Okay,
She stayed back. So if I
Yeah, I know.
here's the traditional sense, 8x minus 1. And what you want to do is flip the x and the y and then solve for y. Here's your inverse. With my technique, here's how you would work it. So I'm looking for the inverse of my function. It's linear, so what's the inverse of a linear?
Linear.
It's just linear. Minus 1, what's the opposite of minus
Plus.
1?
Plus one.
Plus 1. Now pay attention. 8 times x. 8 is just being multiplied to just the x, right? Not the one, just one thing. Now we already know what operation is opposite of multiplying. What's the opposite of multiplying?
Division.
Dividing. So I know within my inverse I'm going to divide by 8. But how does it work in regards to these other numbers? Think of it this way. What is the opposite of multiplying 8 by one thing? It's dividing 8 by everything.
Oh.
If you're multiplying 8 by one thing, then the opposite of one thing is
Divide by
everything.
everything.
So, okay, I see.
So, the inverse of that. X, what do I do with that plus 1?
It's actually a negative one.
Negative one.
Mhm.
What's the opposite of multiplying 3 by one thing?
Dividing it over everything.
Dividing over everything, very good.
Is that literally
That's what
just
I'm
it?
Yeah, that's it.
X minus 1 divided by 3.
Yeah, that's your inverse.
You don't have to do all those extra steps?
No, not with my method. You just identify what do you see, and then write the exact opposite of that.
Math is making me mad.
Get angry, get angry.
So let's see one more example. What if we were to have this problem? Let's go backwards. So I have an x minus 1 over 3. What's the opposite of minus 1?
Plus 1.
And what's the opposite of dividing 3 by everything?
Multiply by 3x.
Multiply 3 by one thing. And that one thing will always be your x.
Oh, cool.
So 3x plus 1.
So when I see this, I'm gonna automatically think, you see that the one by the X goes at the bottom, and then that's it.
What?
So I change it up.
Well, let's complicate a little bit more. So I have this 3 being multiplied to x, and it's adding 1, and I'm dividing 2 by all of it. So take these each one by one and write down the opposite of what you see. So looking at my function, what's the inverse of a linear?
Linear.
Linear. What do you do with that plus 1? What's its inverse?
It's gonna be negative.
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 Now,
Negative.
what do I do with the 2 that's divided by everything?
Divided by one thing, x.
Very good. Not divided, but I think you meant to say
But
multiply.
it's just reverse.
I mean, yeah,
It is reverse, yeah, you're opposite.
Shut your mouth.
And now, what is the opposite of multiplying 3 by one thing?
Divided by everything.
Divided by everything. There's your inverse.
So you just flip the numbers?
You just flipping the numbers,
And flip the sign.
you're flipping the operation, and you're flipping
The sign?
what it's affecting here. Yeah, you're gonna flip the sign, well, the operation plus is minus, so. Now, you did mention the sign. Notice how my x is positive, right? Did I flip it to a negative?
No.
No. Let's go here. My x is positive. Did I flip it to a negative? No. I wouldn't say that's the exception, but you don't flip the function from positive to negative. You only flip signs. You're not really flipping signs, you're flipping the operation. Opposite of a plus is subtraction, right? So if I were to throw in some negatives in here, let's see how it affects the problem. So the function we'll do negative 2x minus 1. And let's see if we can find the inverse. I'm going to solve it the traditional sense first. So I'm going to flip the x and the y and solve for y. So add 1, x plus 1 equals negative 2y. Then divide by negative 2, divide by negative 2. X plus 1 over negative 2 equals y. That's my inverse. Now let's look my method, how you would go about it. So I have looking for the inverse. Linear, the inverse of it linear is a linear.
Come on, bro. Linear, think about that, bro.
Opposite of minus 1 is plus 1. And now I'm going to grab all of this together, this negative 2. What's the opposite of multiplying negative 2 by one thing?
Multiply by everything. Or divide by everything.
Divided by everything. Now note, I'm not flipping the sign here. If you're multiplying or dividing, you don't flip those signs. It stays negative.
Why does it stay negative?
Just how multiplication works across the number line.
Yeah.
If your number line stays positive, then you're going to stay positive. But if you happen to flip it negative, then you're just going to continue to.
So is that easy? You just flipping the sign. All you doing is just flipping the sign.
Again, you're flipping the operation. I want to get caught in saying I'm flipping signs because you might flip this sign.
Alright.
So the opposite of minus 1 is plus 1. Because I'm talking about subtraction 1, adding 1. Here's an interesting problem. F of x minus x plus 4.
X.
Why in the world, what do you think its inverse is?
X. It's gonna be.
Is that its inverse?
No.
Guess what? It is.
What?
Oh, is it because of the f of negative 1?
Ah.
Let's see why.
I don't know.
So let's solve this traditionally. So I'm going to flip the x and the y. So this is x, and this could be a negative y plus 4. So solving, I'm subtracting 4,
It still
x
equals the
minus
same thing.
4 minus y, multiply by a negative 1,
And it still equals x minus 4.
and equals negative x plus 4 when I distribute
I can eat myself.
as the inverse.
Damn.
It's the same thing.
Math is
You're gonna be laughing and then my food falls
Mr.
off.
Clark.
But now let's see why that worked with my method.
Flex, damn, it's not like shit over here. Flexing on these guys.
So
I'm hitting V.
just look at the x. My function is linear. Its inverse is linear. What's the opposite of a minus 4?
Positive plus 4. Plus 4.
Oh, sorry, what's the opposite of plus 4? Minus 4. Now, what number is here?
That's
1.
Very good. Think of this as a negative 1 being multiplied. So what's the opposite of multiplying one thing by negative 1?
Dividing over everything.
Dividing negative 1 by everything.
Huh?
And what happens when I divide by everything? After I simplify, I get
122.
x equals negative x, and then that becomes a plus 4.
So you're just taking the top. Okay, I see.
So, again, you're not going to flip the sign to positive. What you're doing is, this is a negative 1 being multiplied. You're going to divide that negative 1. So again, it keeps it negative. And then it actually happens to turn that back into a positive. So yeah, linear functions could be inverses of themselves. I want to look at one more. Something that may get you stumped on today's assignment, and that is rationals.
What the fuck? There was a whole dry erase marker on my shoulder, color orange.
Now, can you remember, what's the inverse of a rational?
Color orange.
Rational.
It's a rational. So f of negative x equals 1 over x. Now let's look at the numbers. This is what you would consider inside. So notice it's inside here with my fraction. So what's the opposite of plus 4 inside?
Minus 4 outside.
Minus
Minus 4 outside. What's the opposite of negative 1 outside?
Plus 1 on the
Plus
inside.
one inside.
Plus 1 on the inside. And when I say inside, it means the denominator. with the X.